lovely people, my name is Emma and today I'm filming my TBR for Women in History Month. Now this is not actually my TBR for the month, I've already released that. This is coming out like partway through the month, but what I wanted to do was collect up all the books that are on my non-fiction TBR that are about either an individual woman or women's place within history, slash some of them are slightly more contemporaneous, and just kind of books that focus on women really at the heart of it, and to kind of draw a little bit of spotlight on them. And these are books that I will hopefully get to soon-ish. Soon often meaning the books you want, and like maybe within the next 2 years. Some of them I think will feature on Springathon and the History Challenge, but please don't expect me to get through any of these particularly promptly. The first one of these is Beatrix Potter, A Life in Nature. This one I actually saw recommended by Nathalia over at Curious Reader. Beatrix Potter is obviously a very famous author who wrote the Peter Rabbit tales, but she was also like a very strong nature lover, naturist, and she sort of has made like a lot of she was like a gifted artist, a kind of pioneering scientific woman, and this is a story about her life and some of the other things she did outside of just the Peter Rabbit stories. It's a bit chunky, so it's a little intimidating, but apparently it's a phenomenal read. Another one that is very, very popular on Booktube and sort of within the book community in general is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. Henrietta Lacks was a black woman who was suffering from a rare form of cancer, I believe, but basically her cancer cells were taken without her consent and then were then used to then go on to create a very sort of medical breakthroughs and scientific breakthroughs in the treatment of cancer. I believe the exact details I'm hazy on because I haven't read the book yet, but basically this is a look at her life and her family's life and how this kind of using of her actual like bodily materials without her consent, especially after her death, I think they continued using them, what that really happened to her. And then it looks at medical consent in general and some of the abuses that the black community has suffered at the hands of the medical community. It's supposed to be an incredible read. One of my friends has read it and she just like raves about it, so I really need to get around to it soon. Also the cover on this one is fab. Then I also have Discovering Dorothea by Karolyn Shindler, the life of the pioneering fossil hunter Dorothea Bate. Dorothea Bate apparently was a fossil hunter. I had never heard of her. She's not popped up in any of the various paleontology books I've read. Mary Anning is kind of the classic forgotten woman of paleontology that everybody kind of leans towards, and I have read a book on her. She features in quite a few of the sort of general compendiums of paleontology. Dorothea has been conspicuously absent, so I'm really interested to learn about her. I did actually try starting this for non-fiction November last year, but I just started a new job and my brain definitely couldn't handle it, and it is super dense when it comes to its information. The font's also quite small, so I might actually end up getting it on ebook just as I can zoom the font a bit bigger and then it genuinely makes it less intimidating. I know it shouldn't matter, but it really does. So yeah, I'm intrigued. She was a young woman in the early 1900s. So that's a little bit later, I believe, than Mary Anning, which will be really interesting to see in kind of comparisons of their lives, how that sort of, I think, 50-year difference we're looking at there. I'm very hazy on when Mary Anning did her thing. What did that mean in terms of how involved or not she could be within the scientific community? So I'm really curious about this one. One that I picked up super recently on Kindle is The Girl with Seven Names, and I believe this is the story of a woman who defected from North Korea, and it's about her story. I know nothing more than that, except again it's quite a popular one that I think, again, my friend Catherine has either read or planning on reading, and it just sounds incredible. So an incredible story, and I'm intrigued. I also have the Radium Girls, and this one is specifically about the girls who use radium paint to paint the like little numbers on watches at the time, and basically they were told that it was completely safe, and they were actually taught to put the paintbrushes in their mouths to like get a finer tip. But radium is like super bad for you and essentially is radioactive, I believe, and cause all sorts of really horrendous cancers, especially of like the mouth and throat for these girls, and cause some absolutely awful pain. But it also was about kind of the companies who they were working for basically shunning these women, refusing to help them or support them, and then sort of the, I think, the advancements in like workers' rights that came out of this. Apparently the book is absolutely intense and harrowing. It was a really popular pick for the History Challenge last year, which is why I then ended up buying it. I think Rosie Shoot, I can't remember her surname. Rosie, whose channel I'll link down below, raves about this book. Kate might have also read it recently as well. Lots of people talk about it, and I definitely need to get to it sometime soon. Just fixing my laptop there, just like dipping down. One that was a spur of the moment pick from the works, which I do need to try and get around to, and apparently it's now a Netflix TV show, but I will not be watching it because my night terrors will not enjoy it, is Unbelievable, the true story of doubt and betrayal. I think this has a few other different titles as well. I think I've seen it in a couple of different iterations, but it was basically it's about a series of rape cases where police said that the girls had lied, and then it's about a specific detective who manages to connect the dots between these cases and kind of goes on this manhunt for this particular serial rapist. And it's basically how this rapist managed to exploit the system by knowing that his victims were never going to be believed, and how the police allowed this to continue for so long because nobody believes women. Rape culture is something that is horrific and something that I've read a little bit about before. I want to read more, but I also don't want to, because I just know that it's an incredibly depressing topic that, like, sometimes in life you just need to not read things that are sad. Sometimes you have to, ignorance is bliss. But also, an important part, I think, of reading non-fiction is reading things that are hard to read. So I think that this is going to be my next kind of big title that I kind of take on in terms of, like, hard-hitting stuff that will make me feel crappy about the world, but it's still important to do anyway. So God knows exactly when, but this is kind of my next one, and it was, like I say, a little bit of a spur of the moment purchase from the works, but those have been some of my favourite books in the past, so I think it's going to be enjoyable. Is always the wrong word for these kind of books, but a good reading experience. Oh god, nobody likes words. A history one that I'm super psyched for, and I definitely want to try and get round to, maybe for the history challenge, maybe sooner, is A Lab of One's Own by Patricia Fara. This is science and suffrage in the First World War, and it's basically looking at how the First World War really opened the doors for women in science. I don't know any more than that, but I enjoy the fact that it is indeed riffing off of the idea of A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf, which is a sort of essay collection I have read and is very incredible, a classic iconic piece of non-fiction that one should definitely read if one likes non-fiction or feminist texts. So I'm intrigued. Yeah, I think this is gonna be good. Women in science is always good. Another one that's kind of about women within a specific industry is The Queens of Animation, and this is looking at some of the early animators who worked for Disney, I believe, and some of the women who were involved in those early movies. Again, I don't know a crazy amount about it, but I do know that Nathalie from Curious Reader speaks very, very highly about this one, and it's kind of taking on sort of and I think this book will be really interesting because I love art history, and I think this is going to take my love for art history, just move it more into a modern context. So I'm excited again to try and get to it. I picked it up again super cheap on Kindle. I really like picking up spur of the moment books on Kindle. I always keep an eye out for the Kindle sales, and then I'm like, when I recognise the title that I know I've been meaning to grab, I'm like, oh, £2, yes please. So that was in my last kind of batch of those, but again I'm thinking it might be a really good history pick. Like the history challenge pick. And then I think my last book, although there's probably more hidden upstairs that I haven't really been aware of, is Charity and Sylvia, A Same-Sex Marriage in Early America by Holt Cleves. I think this is somebody's PhD dissertation or something. It's got a very like academic-y kind of feel to it, but it's basically about Charity Bryant and Sylvia Drake, two ordinary middle-class women who serve as a window on historical constructs of marriage, gender and sexuality in the late 18th and 19th centuries. So yeah, I'm intrigued. I'd love to know what these two women kind of say about the history of same-sex marriage. It's something which often, when sort of looking into LGBTQ+ kind of history, there's often a big focus on men within that, and it's quite common for women to be erased from that kind of story. So I'm really interested in seeing what this book has to say about kind of lesbian same-sex marriage within late 18th, early 19th century. So very intriguing, but I do think it's going to be a bit academic-y in nature, so I'm curious. So those, I think, are all the books on my non-fiction shelf that really focus on either a particular woman or women within a particular industry for my TBR in general. There might be a few more, and I'm definitely clearly going to be buying some more, and I'm sure that my want to reads on Goodreads is absolutely chock full of even more stuff. But if I had to pick one, which one do you think I should read next? Depending on if anybody gets to any kind of particular comments, I might try and prioritise it for April or maybe May. So do let me know down below which one you would like me to read next so that you can hear my thoughts on it. Also, have you read any of these just in general? Do you think there's any that aren't really worth the time? That's always a controversial one on BookTube. So have a wonderful reading week, and I will chat to you soon. Bye!